Hello, you hardcore. Straight into action. It's Julian. How we doing, Julian?
I'm all right, Russell. I'm good. Good week so far. Enjoyed the fight at the weekend, so I'm all good, pal.
What did you think I don't really want to talk about rest of undercard because I thought it was pretty dire. I know that Moses Tyler made his debut and his brother fought, didn't he, and got beat. He fought in his next fight for WBC International. But let's go straight in with Yarde. You called it, didn't you? Correct, Julian?
I thought he'd get beat. I thought Yarde would give him a really good fight. Style-wise, I thought it'd be a little bit unusual for Beterbiev.
He made first, didn't he, in the fight, Beterbiev. He had a look at him. Do you know, like Lomachenko and Usyk, they do that at the beginning of fights, don't they? They fight in all sorts of different ways and don't really achieve anything early, do they?
It's what Reg Guttridge used to call a scouting report, where you basically have a look at somebody, and good fighters can judge 12-rounders, and that's what the difference is between the world-class guys and the elite guys, is they can just judge 12-rounders. Although Lomachenko didn't judge it too well against Lopez, but you know, all the good fighters are able to do that. I remember seeing Ray Leonard against Dave Boy Green, knowing he was so many levels above Dave Boy Green. For 2 rounds, he just danced around. He took his time. It's almost like, I'm going to get you whenever I want. But I thought Yarde was really good. Listen, you can't criticize what he did. He gave 100%. He had some good moments in that fight. But ultimately, like I was saying, championship fights were over 12 rounds. I thought he'd give him a much better fight than people said. I never thought for 1 minute it was going to be a blowout. I thought he performed well, and the champion's a hell of a fighter, isn't he?
Oh, God, he's mesmerising, and he's got an answer for everything. He adjusts all the time, doesn't he? And to say he's not flashy, he does everything really, really good, doesn't he?
There's something about these Russian fighters. They've got such good balance, and the feet are nice and wide, and they're always just out of range or just in range. They're never on the edge of range. They'll always what I call shuffle in and shuffle out, shuffle in and shuffle out. And fighters with such good balance like that, they're always in a position to either slip the shot, push off the shot, or block the shot, or counter the shot. And that's what the education is, and that's what helps by having, 200, 300 amateur fights. They just become so good at what they do. And they don't spend a huge amount of their time doing strength conditioning. They get conditioned through boxing.
Yeah, I'd like to see Usyk and Beterbiev at cruiserweight.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting one. I mean, I think he obviously is a little bit too big for him, but I do worry about Beterbiev, and just because he's 38 years old. I mean, it's such a shame, isn't it? Because we'd like to see another 5 years of him, wouldn't we?
Yeah, we were at his best. Yeah,
at his absolute best. But they have these massive amateur careers, and it means that they don't turn over until late. And it just shows that, he did the right thing. But had he turned over 5 years before, you'd be talking about. You talk about greatness, don't you? You talk about great fighters with absolute longevity, championship reigns 8, 9, 10 years, but we don't really see much of that these days. But guys like him and Usyk, had they turned over younger, they'd be just so dominant for so long, it'd be untrue.
Imagine him against Michael Moorer when he was knocking everybody out at light heavyweight. He had about 10 defences, didn't he, Michael Moorer, didn't he?
Yeah, Michael Moorer was such a sharp punching southpaw, and he did the jump like Michael Spinks, didn't he? He jumped from light heavyweight straight to heavyweight. He never stopped off at cruiserweight. And Moorer, there was always saying that even when he was like beating the likes of Frankie Swindell, that Moorer was always, he had a sweet tooth, he liked his food, and but you wonder if he'd have stayed at light heavyweight, it'd have been dangerous.
Yeah. What did you think of Steve Gray's performance as referee?
I've got to be honest, I watched it once. I was over at Anna's when I watched it. I don't know. I just don't know about Steve Gray as a judge. You know that. I think he's a better referee than he is a judge. What was it you didn't like about his performance, Russell?
Well, I just thought that he kept getting in way of things, letting things worry, and were a bit fussy for me. Like, I've
I
mainly,
think it's a British thing.
yeah, I mainly got a problem with judging, mate. Two judges had Beterbiev down going into eighth round. You've seen scorecards, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah.
So, where did you what do you make of that? Do you think the fix were in if it went 12 rounds?
I had it closer than you did. I didn't think there was that much in it. I thought I need to see it again. Sometimes you need
I
to watch
watched
a
it
fight
twice,
again.
mate. I watched it twice. I watched it early before we come on here on air now. I watched it
There were
with sound
there
off.
were yeah, there were rounds when the sort of early rounds, he didn't really get going too quickly, did he? Beterbiev, and
Oh.
Yarde was stealing a couple of rounds with nice little counter left hooks, little shots. There was one good uppercut at one point, and what it is this is just my opinion, Russell. This is not about the fight or the scoring of the fight. This is just an opinion. We have a 10-point must system, and one of the problems with the 10-point must system, you can have 6 rounds completed, and you can have one fighter A wins 3 rounds and fighter B wins 3 rounds. Now, fighter A might win those 3 rounds literally just by 1 or 2 shots. It could be so close and so subjective. And fighter B can win 3 rounds, and he dominates those rounds, but he doesn't knock the guy down, or he doesn't come close to stopping him. And on the 10-point must system, you've got 3 rounds each. But when you look at that holistically and you look at the 6 rounds, you say, yeah, but that guy was so dominant in the rounds that he won. And, fighter A only won those rounds by such a small amount. And that's what happens with boxing. And that's why it becomes, we discuss it so many times. I'm not saying you can change the 10-point must system, but that's how I scored it. I scored the fight, and the rounds I gave to Yarde, and I did give him rounds. I thought he edged them. He just edged them with some crisper work. And the rounds that I gave to Beterbiev were more dominant rounds, they were more convincing rounds, where he hurt Yarde, but he didn't hurt him enough to give a 10-8 round. And I think sometimes, I'm not saying that's what you did or what other people do, but you sometimes see the whole fight and you remember those more convincing rounds than you do the quiet rounds. And it's just such a subjective thing, is scoring when there's only 1 or 2 punches, in the closer rounds. And I've said this before, just one more on scoring. A guy can beat a guy 10 rounds to 0, and that can be a really competitive fight. And another guy can win 97-94, 7 rounds to 3. That can be a really one-sided fight because of the 7 rounds are so dominant and the 3 are up for grabs. And it's just one of those things with the scoring, and that's how I had it. I had it close. I don't have an issue what you have and what a lot of other people have with the scoring. But Beterbiev's rounds were more convincing. It was a 12-round fight. He paced himself better, and you just got that sense after about 6 rounds. You thought he's gonna stop him, and he's gonna do what we all expected to do.
Yeah, he's a phenomenal fighter. Finishing off with light heavyweights, Tony Bellew, aka the reappearing man, the man that's not beat a champion, has come out, put a tweet out. He said Callum Smith knocks out Beterbiev inside 6 rounds. Has Eddie Hearn put him up to this? Does he just want to get in on a trending story and get his mate in the mix from the Rotunda, or what is he talking out of his rear end?
Well, you've got a Scouser picking another Scouser who's his mate to knock out a dominant world champion. So there's no surprises there. Now, I like Callum Smith, but he's not what I would call elite. He's a former world champion, but I've just said it earlier, didn't I, about there's world class and then there's elite. The elite are the dominant.
Best Westbury wins.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? They're not that memorable, are they? And there's obviously the George Groves one, and Groves was a little bit on the slide, and it wasn't, I think Callum Smith
bad arm injury.
Yeah, do you know what I'm saying? It's just, I don't consider him elite. I consider him a good fighter, a world-class fighter. You look, anybody who's listening will say, McGowan keeps saying this about Elite, he's a former world champion. I don't hold as much value on world championship belts as other people do because I'm a traditionalist, I'm a round peg in a square hole. I keep saying that. And it's just like, I like Liam Smith. Liam Smith was brilliant a couple of weekends ago, but Liam Smith was a WBO world champion. He was a very poor opponent who he beat for that belt. And Liam Smith against Canelo was thrashed. It was thrashed by Jamie Mungo. So I don't consider him elite. And that's not knocking them. It's just me just being honest and saying, I consider Beterbiev to be elite. And he would smash Callum Smith to pieces. And that's not being rude. I like Callum Smith. He'd smash him to bits.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So
it's just it's what they do, isn't it? That it's a big boys club. They're all pals with each other, and they can't give a champion his credit, can they? It's a bit like David Hay. Every single time Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua won when David Hay was retired, he'd put something out about I'm making a comeback because he couldn't stand anybody else to have their moment. So Tony Bellew, and I've always liked Bellew, let Anthony Yarde have his moment for such a brave challenge, and let Beterbiev have his moment for such a fantastic championship performance, and just leave the tweets for a few days before you start associating other people's names with these two fighters.
His boss, Eddie Hearn, or Eddie Hills, the 6-0 Iceman, 4 by way of. Only footage we've got is it just Spotty Frank. Oh, he's come out now. He's a victim at Billy Ricky Iceman, isn't he? Body shot.
Yeah.
Mazda put him down when he was 18, didn't he? So Eddie Hills couldn't get Callum Smith, Bivol, or Boazzi at it, and they're all DAZN men and Matchroom men. Or Boazzi were at one point.
Can't deliver it, can he? He talks a good fight. Do you know what? That's the one thing I said to Anna when I was watching it at the weekend and the coverage. I said, I kind of feel for Boazzi. I says, he's sat there, he's a pundit on a massive night. And you've got, Yarde, who's having now his second chance at a world title against another formidable fighter. And whatever you say, he's had his opportunities delivered. And we've got Joshua Boazzi, who's been pro for nearly 7 years. And what actually, and this is not being rude, what actually has he done? I'm not talking about what has he done in terms of boxing, because we'd all love to achieve what those guys achieve. But if you look at Boazzi compared to the hype that he got, the Olympic, he was really one of the standouts of that Olympics. He was brilliant getting that bronze medal. And what has Boazzi actually done in terms of an elite or a world level performance that's put the champions on notice? Is anybody even fearing Joshua Boazzi right now?
No.
So why hasn't he delivered? Why hasn't he had these opportunities?
Why hasn't Tony Yoka? He got a gold at the same Olympics.
And if anybody says, 7 years he's been pro, and after 2 years Evander Holyfield fought for world title, and this is 7 years and he hasn't fought anybody of note. And I'm sorry, Craig Richards is not world class, and that's not being disrespectful. So he hasn't beaten anybody world class.
He's a world class puncher though, Craig Richards.
He's not a world class fighter, Russell, is he? In fact, I disagree with you there. It's not often I do, and I'll tell you why. I've had this conversation with so many people. World class punchers knock out world class fighters. When you look at a world class puncher, it's somebody who carries his power up to world level and knocks out elite top level fighters. World class punchers are not people who have just got high knockout percentages. That's my view. And I always had that debate about Frank Bruno. People always said Frank Bruno was a massive puncher, but Bruno's power against the top fighters didn't register at all against the Bone Crusher Smiths, Tim Witherspoons, and everybody else. And he beat a Jerry Coetzee who was like a geriatric. And I'm just repeating the point, but world-class punchers knock out world-class fighters, and Craig Richards has yet to do that.
Yeah, I agree, mate. Absolutely agree. We've just had a exclusive. Michael Benson, Eddie's mouthpiece, has just come out and put a tweet out.
Right.
Conor Benn is reportedly expected not to be banned from returning to the WBC rankings, as it's been indicated that he will get a ruling in his favour from the WBC investigation into his drugs test situation. Separate British Boxing Board of Control stroke UCAD investigation still ongoing, according to Mail Sport, and Twitter's now on fire. There you go, you were right, Julian.
I'll take no pleasure in that, mate. None at all.
If Benson said that, that's gospel, isn't it? Blue tick Benson, Eddie's mouthpiece. Fucking hell. No wonder they were grinning at Eubank and laughing and all that, then, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting to the stage. I'm just not even going to think and talk about Conor Benn. I've done that several times, and I keep having a little jab and a little. Listen, like I've said before, Russell, if boxing doesn't care about boxing, why should I care about it, really? And it doesn't matter to me what Conor Benn achieves ultimately. I know what I've got him down for.
Yeah, cheat. But,
listen, I predicted it so long ago. So they'll go the WBC route. There's a reason he's relinquished, or it wasn't relinquished. There's a reason he didn't renew his Boxing Board of Control license.
Yeah.
And
whatever.
The only thing I'll say, and I've said it 1,000 times, the zone must be in a real shit state if they're pinning all their hopes on Conor Benn being their kind of, their flagship, the fighter for that broadcaster, because he really isn't that good. He really isn't that good.
I wonder how boxing is going to react if no happens to this. I mean, where does it sit?
Well, what it does is, as I've said previously, you need to stop all drug testing then, because VADA, who is the gold standard of drug testing.
Eddie Earn's words.
I've got this wrong. So if you can't trust VADA tests, forget drug testing, because it's not reliable. It's all contaminated. If they can't get it right, none of the anti-doping agencies can get it right. So forget it. Let people take what they want and do what they want. Before anybody jumps on that, I don't support that, by the way. I hate that. But let's admit then we've got a filthy, dirty sport, and then we choose to watch it or we choose not to watch it.
Yeah. It's bad, isn't it?
You've gutted me there, actually, if I'm being honest, mate. You've just taken the wind right out of my sails. Do you know what? I love coming on your show, and I always say to you, there's nothing more predictable than bad behaviour and corruption, don't I? I always quote that. There's nothing more predictable. Look at the Tories at the moment, and what's been going on with tax evasion and all this kind of stuff. There's nothing more predictable than corruption. And people, and I know we're going to move on to misfits at some point, people only care about money, mate. Money is the only thing that matters, because had Conor Benn been a journeyman, well, first of all, he wouldn't have been tested, but had he been somebody who didn't sell tickets, there'd have been no lawyers and no scientists and no reports commissioned and none of this stuff. Nobody would have given a toss. There's a correlation between how much cash you generate and a forgiveness for being a alleged drug cheat. We've seen this with the heavyweight champion of the world. We've seen this with the biggest name in sports still, in Canelo Alvarez. And we're now seeing this with someone who's got a very famous last name. If you are a big draw and you bring money to the table, everything just gets swept under the carpet.
Yeah. It's not good, is it?
It's crap, mate. It's as bad as it gets, mate. It's as disappointing as it can be, Russell.
The license holders will be up in arms over this now. Oh, I already know feelings about some of them. They'll be up in arms to
you know why, though, don't you? You know why? Because everybody knows the truth, don't they?
Yeah.
People were not up in arms if the guy's innocent, if the guy's inadvertently taken something he wasn't supposed to, and he had no idea whatsoever, people would give him the absolute benefit of the doubt. I think people want to give him the benefit of the doubt. The reason people are going to be up in arms is because what you've just said, and it's all the things we've said. Failure to sign up to the VADA testing right at the beginning, drop from the
Used
rankings.
every loophole they could.
Yep. Failure to sign up. Up and down thrillers with non-punchers, sloppy power, sloppy punching. Your dad said you shouldn't be going pro, sparking former world champions and chilling them. The Dr. Usman, no one's talking about all this kind of corroborating evidence. You know, Dr. Usman, who said it's the easiest thing in the world to get through drugs tests clean. The same guy who's advertised himself as Conor Benn's official camp doctor. You know, two failed tests, 2 adverse findings. There's all this stuff. There's so many smoking guns right now. But the WBC, one of the most corrupt organisations that there are going to give him a benefit of the doubt. And that's the thing. And nobody will buy this. Nobody will buy it, but the people who will buy it will be the casuals and the Conor Benn fans who buy tickets. And it's what it's all about, Russell, isn't it? It's all about money. It's all about branding and marketing and putting spin on things and everything else. And that's what we're going to see now. And I honestly, it's gutted me as that, because it's just so predictable. And Benson's pretty accurate with his stuff, isn't he?
He's had his mouthpiece, isn't he, Benson?
Yeah. He puts a spin on it, doesn't he? Like these spin doctors that the governments have, and that's exactly what he does. So they've been so confident about this, but the court of public opinion has spoken, and all you have to do is you only have to look at anything on social media about Conor Benn and just read the comments. I'm not talking about people who are just being vicious and vile just for the sake of it. I'm just, the general feeling is really bad. The general feeling is very unsupportive. And it's, as I've said, there are too many smoking guns for this just to be written off as contamination. But, you know, what I have heard is he's looking very slim these days.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm just wondering now about kids that wanted to fight for British titles and that, and they're thinking, well, where does this all leave them now in his weight category?
It's a message, isn't it? It's a message. It's a general message to society, and that's cheat. If you're popular, you get away with it. Do what you can to get by through life. Don't forget, you know, like you said, what about all these kids? What about these kids who look up to Conor Benn, who looked up to Nigel Benn? These young amateurs out there, these young fighters turning pro. What message is that sending to them? It's basically just saying, do you know what? If you want to hand up, there's alternative ways you can go about this. And what I've started doing, and I'm not going to mention them, but the more, listen, there's always been performance enhancing drugs in sport, and it's becoming quite prevalent in boxing. But you start to look at fighters now, don't you? And, you know, I look at those telltale signs. One of those telltale signs is performances that just belie that person's talent and that person's history of not stopping people, and all of a sudden start stopping people. But then you start to look at the deltoids and the traps and the skull enlargements, and you start looking at before and after pictures. And there's so many dirty fighters in boxing right now, and I think the welterweight division's filthy with performance enhancing drugs, but I'm obviously just not going to call out fighters. And then you get a kid like McKinson, who you just know is clean. You just know he's clean.
Honest pro.
Yeah, and what chances he got against all these dirty pros?
If they've got big backing, you've had it, haven't you? No, it's backing, isn't it?
Massively. You know, there were rumours of a couple of fighters when I was coaching who was more involved in it around the gyms. There were a couple of fighters and people were talking about them. And I don't think it's something that boxing people spread. I don't think there's any envy there. I think it's genuinely people don't like a cheat, do they?
Yeah.
And you'd hear certain coaches, and I'm not going to say, but I remember once in the elite ABAs, there was one particular year when there were a couple of fighters. This is in the ABAs, Russell, and I'm not going into detail, but with a couple of kids in them, and the trainers who took these kids to the elite ABAs, you know, over the quarterfinals, semi-final, and finals, they came back, and these two guys who I know that they know a lot about performance enhancing drugs. They know more than I do, a lot more than I do, and they said you could see the kids who were juicing. Couple of those were podium squad boxers, and you could see the kids who were juicing. You know, there's a difference between an acne rash and certain telltale signs with people's skin not being very good. But kids with like 17, 18-year-olds really overdeveloped, you know, like I said, deltoids and traps, and just physically so strong. And that was in the ABA elites. And I just thought it was so, you know, you'd like to think amateur boxing is so pure. And when coaches are coming back and they're kind of half pointing the finger at certain boxers saying that those kids are juicing, and they're already prepping them for that professional career, for that successful professional career, and they're already at it, Russell. And I'm not saying that's a high percentage of boxers, but the people who told me that are really astute people who know a lot about performance enhancing drugs, a lot more than I do. I'm no expert on it. And they were said, listen, it's even in the ABAs, mate. I'm telling you, it's even in the, you know, these some of these elite amateurs are on the growth, and it's so sad.
Yeah, it's bad, isn't it?
It's shit, man.
Moving on from performance enhancing drugs to recreational drugs. Kell Brook, the special one, having a line in his house. Somebody's filmed him. It's gone from his house. It's gone viral. Has he been stitched up, or is it a prank, or is he doing it for attention, or what do you make of it?
It's a difficult one to ask me, is that, and I'm going from a boxing point of view and from a recreational point of view, and I'll tell you why. I might come across as a bit square sometimes. I've never done it. I've never understood drugs. I don't drink, as you know. I have drank. I'll have a drink now and again, and it is now and again. But I've never done drugs, so I don't get it. But all I keep getting told is everybody's doing it. You know, like people make statements about everybody's on this and everybody's on that. All I keep getting told is there's so many people, Jules, who do coke. There's like there's just a recreational thing. You'd be blown away. So I know a lot of boxers who do it or who've done it, and I won't go into detail, but it seems like everybody's doing it. It's obviously a nice person who's videoed him and grassed him up. That's a great friend who's done that. But I'm not going to hang Kell Brook out to dry on this one, because first of all, he's retired. He's no longer a professional fighter. He's finished in boxing. And whilst I've never understood drugs and I'd never support drugs, it's up to Kell Brook what he does. It's just, he's such a shame. He's supposed to be a role model, isn't he? But I don't know, mate. And maybe that's not something he's comfortable with. I've got mixed feelings about it, Russell, because the guys, it's difficult for fighters when they finish boxing. We've heard Nigel Benn said he's done it. Ray Leonard, my hero, was an alcoholic, and he was a heavy cocaine user. And I don't know if it goes with the rich and famous thing. I don't know if it's just something like everybody's doing, what I keep getting told. I've got mixed views on it. I just don't get it. I don't get drugs. So it's a difficult question to ask me, is that one. But I couldn't help but feel sorry for him.
Yeah. John Fury's 100 victims, because he's 100 now on hard road, isn't he? 100 by way of. Nobody's come forward and claimed reward, have they? To say that you got knocked out by him.
The best way I can describe this, right, I've said it before, John Fury, ex-professional, clearly John Fury can have a row. 6'4", 20 stone. He'll be a handy man. He'll be a handful with John Fury. But there's a few things about that. People make these claims all the time. And I remember Lenny McLean. I read his book. I was young. I was in my 20s. Oh, And I read this Lenny McLean thing. I'd heard about him, and it was quite a romantic view. And I read his account of the Man Mountain York fight, how he knocked this guy cold and smashed him to bits when he was on the floor. And then I saw the reality in the actual footage. It was completely different. And then I also saw Lenny McLean's unlicensed. I'll get to John Fury in a second. I saw his unlicensed record online where someone had put it together, and it was something like 8-6. He'd been hammered by Cliff Fields and Johnny Waldron. They both hammered him a couple of times. He had a couple of other losses. And suddenly this man who claims to have had 10,000 fights, and that's what Lenny McLean said, he'd have to have a fight every day. I saw the reality of the Man Mountain York fight. And it's where I'm coming to this with John Fury, is it's always amazing, and never ceases to amaze me, where this footage, they never claim to be the best boxer, do they? They always say, I was a street fighter, boxing wasn't my thing, I prefer no rules. So that leads me to John Fury. So we've all seen the footage of John Fury, solid pro, brave man, got into a ring, fought a couple of good kids, but it was a very limited professional. Now, then it brings you on to his record, and like you've said, no footage. This is the 90s we're talking about. They were filming bare-knuckle fighters on VHS camcorders in the late 70s, early 80s. There's a lot of footage about, you can find it. Now, we're talking about the 90s, where you're going to have 100 fights. Some of those fights will be captured on video. Little doubt about that. Especially if you're going to fight somebody for 100 grand. 100 grand is a purse I've never heard of for bare-knuckle. I've heard of 30, 40, 50 grand max. But 100 grand 30 years ago, with inflation, what are we actually talking about? 300 grand bare-knuckle fight. That is massive. That is massive money. And surely that would have been, the Sun newspaper would have got hold of that, because the Sun newspaper and the Daily Mirror used to love talking about bare-knuckle fights, didn't they? They were always featuring bare-knuckle fighters. And I don't ever, because I always read about it. I was fascinated by this.
Oh,
stuff.
sure, and all them lot, wasn't it?
Yeah, I romanticized about it, exactly. And I read this stuff and I was captivated by it. I'm a boxing fan. Hard men are very interesting characters. And I saw it on, like I say, Roy Shaw, the governor, Paul Sykes, who was local to me. All these guys were known, either unlicensed fighters, boxers, but they're also known to be hard men in the street. And I just find it curious that there's no footage whatsoever. But there's another thing as well, Russell. You never hear Tyson Fury and Tommy Fury turn around and say, my dad was an unbeaten bare-knuckle fighter, 100 no, do you?
Oh.
You never hear the sons talk about that. And my dad had been an undefeated bare-knuckle fighter, although it's actually not bare-knuckle what he's claiming. He's claiming that it was an all-in fighter, everything goes fighter. You never hear them comment on that one. And what we also know with traveller culture is there's a straightener, and then there's what they call the dirty go. But the vast majority of fights are straighteners. But John Fury's were dirty goes, 100 dirty goes. And then the final point, and I'm not hammering the guy because he could hammer me. Where do we get to 100? Why is it 100? Why is it not 38 fights or 26 fights or a couple of dozen fights? I can't quite remember. 100 no is very, very specific, isn't it?
So it's better than Mayweather's. It's doubled Mayweather.
Well, yeah, 100 fights. I knocked them all out within a few seconds. That's what he said, right? So 100 fights, 100 KOs, and 100 grand bare knuckle fight. We've got a lot of hundreds knocking about, haven't we? I'm just saying,
Listen, MI5 are watching me from moon.
He doesn't. Thing is with John Fury, he doesn't need to fabricate a story about him because everybody knows.
We know he's hard, don't we?
We know he's hard. If John Fury walked in here and
says, you're hard.
I'd shit myself if he walked in here and says, what you've been saying about me on Porky's Corner. I'd shit myself,
I'd say, John, come over here and give me a big kiss.
If I found John Fury in bed with my missus, I'd tuck him in and make him a cup of tea, mate. Of course, he's a hard guy. We know he is, but do you know what? Everyone talks about Bartley Gorman, who was a phenomenal bare-knuckle fighter by all accounts. But
Yeah.
have you ever heard of 100-0?
I've not heard of 100. He could fight though, Bartley Gorman, but I've never.
Bartley Gorman could fight, but if you were a bare-knuckle fighter and you were 100
They've
100-0,
been making
you-
films about him on
you'd be the hardest man who's ever lived. John L. Sullivan would take a bow, honestly. That's like a fantastic career. And you'd probably have face smashed to bits and hands smashed to bits, and you might struggle walking because you only have to see, like we saw the Decker Heggie Danny Christie fight, didn't we?
Oh,
The damage what happens in bare-knuckle fighting, the damage they do to each other.
two hard men, them.
That was a. Now that really, whatever you say about
what a fight, wasn't it?
that was a. Do you know what? I remember I was kind of invested in that, and people say this about Decker and they say this about Danny Christie. Just take it as a fight, right? These guys aren't proclaiming to be role models. They're certainly not role models, but they had a go, didn't they? They absolutely had a go.
That's
And
proper fighting, man. You got to tip your hat to them.
you can say what you want.
And the other kid turned up to fight Decker, didn't he? What's the other kid? The Manchester kid.
Oh, Dean Lynch Ward.
He turned up. He was a smaller geezer. He turned up and got stuck in as well, didn't he?
He turned up and it was about 4 or 5 stone. Give him 4 or 5 stone. You can't hit a guy who's 18 stone full of solid muscle. You know, you could see Dean Lynch Ward when he was moving around. He's done a bit of boxing, K1. You know, he's got good hands and got decent feet. But ultimately, you can't give 4 or 5 stone away, can you? It's like hitting a tree, hitting an oak tree. It just doesn't happen. And Decker's a big old lump, isn't he?
Listen, Decker, hasn't
he? Yeah, he's solid. And Danny Christie can fight, can't he? Danny Christie was a decent amateur. I think he was 16-8 as an amateur. But yeah, listen, that was a fight. Well, I've probably seen that about 6 times. And it was just the fact that the cuts were horrendous. You could hear the hands smashing. And they never complained, did they?
No.
Never complained.
Right, we're out of time, Jules. So listen,
right,
coming on. You've been a pleasure.
My pleasure, mate. You take care, everybody.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Cheers, buddy.
Bye. I hope you've all enjoyed that. We've covered a few bits and bobs this evening, haven't we? No rush to get this out. I don't need to be rushing to get out about Conor Benn. I'll send this out in a couple of days. No rush, is there? No rush. Okie dokie. Peace out. Conor Benn, where's them B samples? Boyaka. And you, Dylan White. And you, Tete.